Three, two, one. Ladies and gentlemen, Scott Brinker is on my program today. How are you, Scott? How are you keeping?
I'm good. How are you, sir?
I'm fantastic. It's great in Singapore because, weather is great. And of course, COVID cases are like down, almost like zero for consecutive days. So how about, wherever you are you in the States right now? How was this spectacular week in the United States with the elections and everything going on?
Yeah, it's been a crazy time in the U.S. Lately, but yeah, I mean, I'm up in Boston, and so it's the fall season, and it's cool, but it's not too cold yet. It's actually very nice. But I love Singapore. I mean, yeah, it's Singapore is beautiful. Give me a couple months when I'm in the middle of winter, and I will be wishing I was in Singapore.
And how I wish I can teleport you over here so that you can educate all of us, about the kind of cool things that you do. And of course, I'm always thrilled and honored to have super marketers, and especially those who are in the MarTech field, right? And it's exciting for me personally because I have Mr. MarTech on my podcast, and that's you. Scott Brinker is the guy.
You're kind, sir.
You are the person that is, singularly, responsible, and more than anybody else, who popularized that term. MarTech, and of course, your researchers that you've done, have provided so much, to extend our thinking about marketing technology. So you're perfect for our audience. And can you maybe, tell us, what, how it all started for you? Because I know that you were an entrepreneur, you were a CEO at age 21, right? Before, of course, you made a name, in the MarTech industry, and he's famous around the world for that fantastic, graphic that looks a little bit crazy, but to me, it's like death because I reference it, to death. Yeah. So maybe tell us how you navigate your early career right to, when you created a graphic, and how it has grown to be like 8,000 companies in that amazing marketing technology landscape graphic in 2020.
Yeah, no, it's been just an incredible past couple decades here. So I remember, around the explosion of the web, I was actually running the technology team of a web development agency, and we would get hired by these Fortune 500 companies. Their marketing department would hire us, because they had these big dreams of all the things they wanted to do on the web. And then because I was running the technology team at the agency, it would be my job to go and talk to the client's IT department, because marketing and IT didn't actually talk in those days. And so I was doing this shuttle diplomacy between marketing and IT, and two things became very clear. First of all, they were just speaking completely different languages. I mean, it wasn't even about hostility per se. It was just they just didn't understand each other's worlds at all. But at the same time, you looked at what the companies clearly wanted to be able to do and the direction like digital business was headed, and you're like, oh my goodness, like these two groups need to come together. And that was really the seed of, this whole Chief MarTech blog, and the recognition that there was going to be an emerging profession of people who understood both sides. They understood and appreciated marketing and, those dynamics of how you find, win, engage, delight customers. But they also understood enough about, how technology works, and just the fundamentals of, architecture and, code logic and, development process. And by being able to marry those two, that was really, what inside companies gave rise to this like whole marketing tech profession. So yeah, it's been, like 10 years ago, that was kind of a weird idea. There weren't a lot of people who felt like, wait, marketing technologist? That sounds like an oxymoron. But yeah, here today, like, yeah, the industry is full of them, and it's wonderful.
That's fantastic. You're this superhero and godlike figure, right, for all marketers and CMOs. So you created this amazing thing called this marketing technology landscape. So it still looks crazier, looking by the day, because it's like 8,000 companies there right now. Yeah. So, I have to make a confession because, earlier this decade, right, when I first joined the marketing industry, the first time when I saw that graphic, I thought it looks more like a Coachella music festival poster. Yeah, right. That is like the kind of poster that you reference when you want to know which are the thousands of bands that are playing a music festival. So, when I saw that graphic, right, it kind of make me inspired. At the same time, it makes me scared as well. Like, do I have to pick up the skills and learn all these tools is like, it's near impossible, right? To even memorize all the names, let alone, be familiar with kind of technology that are, that are useful and also commonly used in the industry. So maybe I'm going to have to ask you this question. How was it like, for any marketers who are like newly joined to an industry, maybe in this day and age, in year 2020, is it important for them to learn every singular tool?
Oh, goodness, no.
One of them, or it's like, how do they actually identify which one is going to be useful for their organization? What are your hot takes on that?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot out there. And so, yeah, I do not recommend for a new person, like, taking a look at my landscape. Set that aside. I mean, the truth is, like, 80% of what you need to do in marketing, you can do with a handful of really good tools, right? You have a good CRM, you have a good marketing automation platform, you have a good web, experience platform. There is so much you can do of just learning how to wield those tools effectively that, frankly, for most marketers is like a great place to start, and then as you start to grow and you expand and you're looking for new ways to, find, engage, delight customers, depending on your business, you'll find there are particular opportunities of how you want to engage them in, like, personalizing, perhaps commerce recommendations, or, the sorts of engagements you need to do through like messaging networks. And so as you grow and you expand, you can, I really like to be led by the business opportunity, the customer opportunity, and then find the technologies that can help support that. So you sort of get there a step at a time. You don't have to know all 8,000. I don't know all 8,000. Don't quiz me. I'll get them wrong.
Yeah, this is really amazing. I think it's great advice as well. So, let's also simplify things for a start, right? Because there is this whole sphere has gotten so complicated and rich at the same time. So maybe you could help marketers out there to like even define a simple thing like, what exactly is marketing technology? What is marketing, and what do you mean by marketing, and what do you mean by technology?
Yeah, you're asking the tough questions because, I mean, the simple answer is to marketing technology is, well, it's any technology that marketers use to get their work done. And that's actually one of the reasons why when I've done that landscape, in addition to including tools that are, very clearly just for marketing, I've also typically included tools like, project management or agile management tools or things like that, not because they're exclusive to marketing, but because they're the sorts of tools that marketing departments use, every week, as part of how they execute their work. But it's hard. I mean, the boundaries of what is marketing, for better and worse, I think this past decade, we've recognized that marketing isn't just a department. We've really like relearned that, particularly in the digital world, like marketing gets infused in everything we do. It's how a salesperson talks with a customer. It's how a customer support representative handles a problem. It's how our product actually works, how people can engage with it, online, and so marketing is just infused into so much of the experience, that working with a company, has today that, you start to look at all the different tools that contribute to that, overall experience. And the boundaries do start to get fuzzy.
This is fantastic. And we all understand that, in order to have a great brand, right, CMOs and marketers have to deliver on customer experience, especially so in year 2020 in the digital world, right? And marketing is the center of it all, right? So with so many changes to like their own culture and even internal operational velocity to be able to live up to customer expectations, what do you think marketing, is the champion, or, it should be the champion of great customer experience, and also it's a great place to start?
Yeah, I do. I mean, different companies, have different people. A lot of companies are in transition, so they might have like a chief digital officer. You have some companies that have organized marketing, sales, customer success together, and they have like a chief customer officer, and so there can be different, ways you, organize. But I think marketing is particularly well suited to lead the charge with customer experience, because first of all, customer experience is the brand now, and we all agree kind of marketing, right? You're the protector of the brand, and there's nothing more central to the brand now than customer experience. But the second thing is marketing is one of those few things that is infused in every stage of the customer journey, right? Sales has a certain role they play at a certain moment. Customer support has a certain role they play at a certain moment. But marketing tends to have engagements with prospects and customers throughout their entire life cycle, and so that sort of gives them that high level view of like, okay, how do we connect the dots across this journey? So I'm a fan of the marketers as the champions of customer experience.
This is brilliant. So I definitely have to ask you the next question. Do you agree that the technology is the easiest part of the equation in terms of like we can these days, right? Marketers can turn over to machine learning, algorithm, and AI to even personalize, and dynamically experiment with individual pieces of content, right? Really, helping CMOs and marketers to do less heavy lifting these days. So do you think that they should focus more on what's happening between brand and the interface with the world instead, which is extremely getting more complex these days?
Yeah, it's an interesting way you word that question, because yes, at some level, the technology is not the barrier, because let's face it, the technology is commercialized now. I mean, anyone with a credit card can go out and buy marketing technology, so there's not a barrier in acquisition that way. But I think where the challenge becomes is all of this technology is still quite new to the marketing profession. Like we don't have the textbooks of like, okay, well, this is how we've been applying this stuff for like decades. There's a lot of experimentation and figuring this out, and so I think for a lot of brands, they're still in a position where buying the technology is not the hard part, but figuring out how to really embed that technology in like their marketing operations, the experience they're delivering to customers. That's hard. That's new. And the only thing I can say to people is you're not alone. I mean, this is really a new era of marketing, and kind of everyone is in a position of figuring out how does this stuff really work? Like, what's effective? What's going to delight our customers? Because what delights our customers might actually be different, than what someone else we heard speak at a conference, delights their customers with.
This is great, and it leads to the next question. I have many superb CMOs and marketers who come onto the podcast. I also have recruiters, people, HR personnel who come onto the podcast as well. So they are all, asking a similar question, like, in terms of, is it better to have in your team a technical person who knows marketing, or vice versa, a marketing person who knows technology? So, in terms of your views, right, with so many companies that are now struggling with this, especially, what's your recommendation?
Yeah, so is it chocolate and peanut butter or peanut butter and chocolate? I think I look at marketing because it's such a broad discipline now. There are so many things that, marketing as a function has to be responsible for, and just technology and this sort of, new level of operations is kind of a relatively new dimension to it. But everything else that marketing was concerned about, like, content and narrative and story, pricing and packaging, the entire like advertising work. I mean, there's so much to marketing that it's very hard to find one person who is brilliant at all of it, right? I mean, it's just such a big field, and so I always recommend, like, if a company is going to have more than one marketer, they really start to think about a team, and they start to think about, listen, we want someone who's going to be running our marketing ops and marketing tech who really understands that stuff, and so perhaps they skew more towards the technology end of the spectrum. At the same time, if I've got someone who's going to be in charge of my brand and creative, maybe it's not so big of a deal that they're not super deep on the technology. Now, I still want them to understand what's possible with the technology, because that's going to feed into the creativity, of what they're actually able to deliver, but they don't have to be the ones figuring out how the stack fits together and which product integrates with another, and, leave that to the ops and tech people.
And, before we move on to a question about content marketing, what are your thoughts on AI in marketing? Do you have a category of AI in your marketing technology landscape, or if is left out of that landscape graphic, right? What's the reason for that? And how much of AI do you think is hype, and how much is actually useful and real?
Oh, wow. So many great questions in there. All right. So the reason we didn't create an AI category was because, quite frankly, a couple years ago, when we were thinking about it, we were looking around, and I would say at least half of the products that we were evaluating in different categories had some kind of AI actually built into them. They might have not been touting it a lot, some more than others, but almost everyone who's got a SaaS product these days is probably leveraging some degree of like machine learning to, how do they simplify categorizations of things or recommendations. You've got all the natural language processing stuff that's now in place here for helping with chatbots. And I mean, AI is really like embedded almost everywhere in software today. So it didn't make sense to have a category. I mean, I know there's some companies that really just specialize in AI models, but I mean, AI as a capability is now embedded everywhere. As to the hype, again, I think like the most important thing for marketers to do is to evaluate vendors based on their actual performance. And so one of the things that I've always advocated is if you have a new technology that you're being pitched, if there is some sort of opportunity to experiment with it, to run a pilot, to run some sort of, like test. This is one of the reasons I'm a big fan of things like freemium and free trial models, is because, it gets you out of like, what is the vendor saying? And like, let me actually see it. Let me see this work, and if it works, great. Listen, I'll pay you. We can scale this. That's awesome. But I find like, too often if a company is leading with an AI message, it's sort of like hiding, the underlying foundation of like, okay, well, yeah, I know you're an AI superstar, but what exactly do you do for my business? How is this actually going to work for me? Prove it.
This is great. And of course, that leads to the next question, right? Content marketing, is, part of your strategy to constantly update this marketing technology landscape graphic, and to also contrast, its differences, in vast numbers. Like when you started, right, it was only 150 companies. Right now it's like over 8,000, right? So is this part of your marketing strategy, and from the beginning to actually create this, to create more conversations and actually use that as a way, as a vehicle to point out the issues of the day, especially in the marketing industry?
Yeah, so again, that graphic, it kind of came about by accident. I was going to be giving a presentation to a group of CMOs, and that was the first graphic I built was basically for that presentation. And it wasn't really about the graphic. It was mostly about, I was just trying to persuade CMOs, as we were chatting earlier, to hire someone with more technical depth on their team so that they'd have the ability to like get their arms around, what these new capabilities meant, to their department. And then when I kept like going back to it year over year to update it, I mean, frankly, I was surprised as anyone, like the way in which it exploded exponentially for a number of years. And I think the only thing, in that process I found is like whenever I produced that landscape in a given year, people would, there'd be a set of people would be like, oh, well, that's going to consolidate. There's no way. 150 is too many. 300 is too many. 1,000 is too many. 2,000 is too many. Yeah, and it's like, listen, I get it. We have a vision of how markets have worked previously, but cloud software just has very different economics to it, and it really has, basically lowered the barriers to entry, where what Mark Andreessen said, software is eating the world. I don't think he meant just like, one piece of software would do everything for everyone. It's more that asymptotically, every company becomes a bit of a software company. And so the marketing world is just full of so many opportunities for like innovation, and engagement and moving things forward with how we deal with consumers and customers that, I don't think we're going to run out of ideas that, an entrepreneur is going to be like, ooh, I've got an idea here. They build it in software and we've got another new MarTech tool.
This is great because I think your marketing technology landscape, all these resources, right, has constantly helped marketers everywhere, help CMOs everywhere, and even help students, right, to understand the nature of the industry that will be entering after they graduate. So understand that you are still continuously, generating and creating new content, right, to actually add value to to all these to the industry, especially. So, like I recently stumbled upon your LinkedIn post where you mentioned that there is a free book that you just released. I think it's about maybe you'll talk us through about this new 2030 MarTech trends in marketing technology for the decade of the augmented marketer. This is a book that you recently published together with your partner, and you actually redefined the very nature of marketing technology and operations, and also illustrated 5 new trends for 2030. So maybe tell us about this book and how we can actually get our hands on this free PDF copy.
Sure. Yeah, it was a project I did in collaboration with WPP, their global head of product management. We sat back many months ago, and we're just trying to look at the emerging patterns that we saw in marketing today that, you could sort of extrapolate and be like, wow, this is actually going to change how marketing operates over this next decade. And that it's a good time to, start orienting to this and really make sure we're preparing to take advantage of this new age. And so, yeah, if you want to go, you get to chiefmartech.com. There's one of the recent articles. You can just click and get the latest copy. There's no form you have to fill out. There's it's ungated. But yeah, the 5 trends are no-code citizen creators. The second is platforms, networks, and marketplaces, a pattern that we're seeing everywhere these days in the digital world. The third is about the great app explosion, which isn't just that MarTech landscape. Frankly, like I just had the, one of the analysts from Forrester on my show the other week, and he's figured out that there's approximately 175,000 SaaS companies, today across all different industries. And he expects that over the next 5 years, that number could grow to 1 million. So the great app explosion is about more than just MarTech, but there's some really interesting ways that I think marketers can take advantage of that shift. Then we talk about, the evolution from a focus on big data to a focus on big ops, which to me, it's about, this next stage of the journey where it's not just about all this data that we've collected and analyzing it. It's how do we actually operationalize on that data, particularly in automated ways and leveraging, more and more AI. And then that leads us into the last trend, which is we talk quite a bit about how to balance this new world we're in, where we've got all these AI tools that are getting better and smarter, with what we as humans can really, leverage, in our talents and our skills, and this harmonization, between human and machine. I think there's so much opportunity, for the marketing department moving forward to, just get incredibly creative with how they leverage this partnership.
So one of the trends that you identified, right? I think it's number 1 on the list, no code. Why do you think it's as important as the other 5 trends that you identified, in the remaining list? When I'm hearing no code for the first time, I'm thinking in terms of the kind of tools that I like to use to actually cover my weakness. For example, I'm really a bad graphic designer. I love tools like Canva that allows me to design really well and actually pass off as a possible graphic designer when it comes to design logos or even show notes and things like that, or show posters, right? So it's are we talking about this kind of no-code direction where, the trend that will be followed by a lot of the marketing technology companies leading to 2030?
Yeah, I think your example with Canva is right on, because when people hear no code, they sometimes think it's just about, programming or, building an app or something. And there's plenty of no code tools that do that. But yeah, I think the much bigger trend is this recognition you have a new generation of software that's basically designed to empower non-specialists, just general business users, general marketers, to be able to make things that previously they wouldn't have been able to make on their own. They would have had to take a ticket and wait for someone in IT to get around to it, if ever they did, or they'd have to hire some outside group to do it. And, the expense didn't necessarily make it worth it, And so I think this whole generation of no-code tools is really about just empowering the individual marketer. If it's whether I want a landing page or I want a little, mobile app for my event I'm running, or I want, a graphic design, for a campaign idea. I can just, I can't do everything. There's still a need for experts when we get into more sophisticated or more complicated, things. But wow, for all of those low end use cases that before, most of them we just had to give up. Like we just saying, well, like, okay, well, I can't do it, and it doesn't make sense for an expert to do it. And I can't wait 6 months for someone in the central services team to do it. The no-code tools are basically making all those things possible. And I think that's really unlocking like a whole new wave of productivity and experimentation for marketing. So I'm very excited about this no-code movement and its empowerment to the marketing profession.
And back to that list, right? The trends that you identified. Number 5, I noticed, is harmonizing human and machine. That actually connects with one of your previous LinkedIn posts as well, where you identify, more automation, also more human touch, right? And of course, where we all want to go, where all CMOs and marketers want to go, is the magical area, the magical corner where can actually have like AI, actually discovering that a customer is facing some issues or having trouble with an issue, right? And then allowing the marketer to personally take this up after being notified by using AI. So is that also one of the examples? Or what are the examples you think will we actually see this fantastic place that all marketers want to be, leading up to 2030?
Yeah, I mean, there's so many examples. I mean, it's basically where AI is particularly effective is its ability to scan a large amount of data very, very quickly, and then either identify patterns or identify anomalies and exceptions in patterns, and then being able to alert, marketers or frankly any other, person on the business team. It might be a salesperson, a customer support person, but AI is able to help find these patterns or these exceptions and then surface them up very quickly, to humans who are then able to take action on those. Anytime you see an exception, in some sort of customer journey, I mean, you have to wonder what's going on there. Is it that prospect is struggling, like they're, something isn't working for them? Is it that they represent, potentially a shift, like a new competitive shift or a new, market opportunity, and it would be very hard for marketers just on their own to like sort through all this data and identify those things quickly. But AI, machine learning can do that at speed and scale. And then, what AI can't do right now is come up with the solution. It can't, handle the entire engagement and solve it for there, but it can bring a human in, and then the human can really lend their powers of engagement and empathy, and communication and synthesizing the different things that are happening, into a resolution to a problem or an experiment for a new opportunity. So yeah, I again, this is why we called it the augmented marketer. I think the next 10 years are going to be such a fun time to be working in marketing, because it really is going to be this like new set of superpowers, that we have, but it's still very much going to keep the spotlight on marketers themselves. Like, what do we do with these superpowers?
And of course, we are all very interested to know or to predict what's going to happen in the next 5 to 10 years, right? So the question, that we want to definitely ask you before we let you go is, what are the distinct solutions to problems whereby, there's efficiency versus data issue, and especially moving between systems, right? With average business actually using hundreds of software these days, can you maybe tell us what are the solutions to this kind of problem, and how do you see actually this evolving in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, this problem kind of caught us off guard because there was this explosion of so many tools and so many new capabilities, but they all kind of emerged independently of each other, and then it's kind of after the fact that we're like, okay, well, all these individual things are great, but how do we get them to work together? And so I think there's 2 ways you see that happening right now. One is there's a whole category of software that's dedicated just to that mission. They call it integration platform as a service, iPaaS. I mean, there's like 100 companies that specialize just in that, and many are very good, right? They help make it easier to synthesize all these different tools and orchestrate how they work together. The other approach you see that's gaining more momentum is the shift from suites to platform ecosystems, So for a while, like the big marketing tech companies, we're trying to just sell you a suite. They were like, listen, everything you need, we will sell you. It's all in one box. You're good to go. That's it. And they didn't have as many open APIs or extensibility or many things around that. They kind of looked at all those other MarTech companies as competitors. And I think what you saw here in these past couple years is a real shift in philosophy, from closed suite to open platform, opening up these APIs, creating these marketplaces, to govern well integrated apps, and increasingly, these MarTech leaders now looking at the rest of the MarTech landscape, not so much as a competitor, but more as a complementer. Like, hey, listen, instead of this being an either or decision, let's make it both, that you get your foundational platform, and then within that ecosystem, you can plug in any of these more specialized tools, and the platform and the specialist app have done the hard work behind the scenes to make them just integrate together nicely. I mean, don't get me wrong, the industry is not perfect yet in this regard. We are still on that journey. But if I were to say, over the next 5 years, where do I expect things to go? I think the platform ecosystems around these companies are going to just get so much better, which is going to be a relief for everyone.
This is fantastic. And of course, before we let you go, one last question, I promise, and it's about your musical background. I saw that when I'm doing research for this podcast, you have a bit of musical background, your music major initially, right? So do you feel like having a creative outlet, such as music, for example, can make you a better marketer and also positively impact your work in a lot of different ways?
Wow. You definitely did your homework. Yes. I guess the short answer is yes. This is frankly the thing I've always found about marketing technology is I think at a distance, people think of it as being purely an analytical discipline, because anything that involves computers, well, that must be mathematical and analytical. But I think what we have to recognize is the tools themselves are actually empowering creativity. I mean, I was a keyboardist when I was in, music. And I'm telling you, in the 80s, the explosion of, all these synthesizers and sampling machines and new recording things, they were very technical tools. But wow, the creative possibilities that they unlocked for people were just astounding. And so, I don't know. I think marketing at this point, even with the technology, is just such a creative outlet if you lean into it that way.
This is fantastic. So I have to thank you so much. And I'm really apologize that we actually crossed over the 30th minute mark. I promise it's going to be only a 30-minute discussion, but this has been such an effortless podcast to do together with you. So thank you for providing your insights, some of your philosophy and your background as well. So we learned so much from this 30-over-minute discussion conversation with you. So thank you again. And we hope to have you come back on a podcast in the future and talk more about how the marketing technology landscape has changed again. Yeah.
Sounds great, Wayne. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for coming on the podcast. You have a nice day. See ya.